It's Friday, and it can only mean one thing. It's time for the Movie Pope Show. And here are your hosts, Lee Suchek and Luka Suar. And now, let's make some noise for the gruesome twosome, the pedantic pair, Lee and Luka.
So, Lee, today we're going to be taking a look at the movie Hoppers. And I know it's one of those movies that you would never in a million years think, Jesus Christ, we're talking about hoppers. But hey, I mean, anything goes on this channel, really. And it's kind of appropriate.
It's popular.
It's kind of appropriate too, given how a few months ago we did a review of Avatar, The Way of Water, or Fire and Ash, or whatever. So, in a weird way, it's kind of us coming full circle, the whole Avatar thing. Now, Lee, you mentioned prior that this was a movie you kind of watched occasionally with your nieces and nephews.
That's true. Yeah, my little cousin, right? So she is 2 years old, and like Hoppers has come up a few times, and her attention span can definitely kind of fluctuate from time to time. So I feel like I had seen bits and pieces of this, never watched it all the way through. So when you kind of mentioned, I'm like, you know what? I guess this is good excuse as any to actually watch the film in its entirety, because I've seen so many tidbits of it that, you know what? I guess now it's important for me to put it all together. And
now when you say tidbits, like what good percentage of the movie are we talking here? Like 30%?
I would probably say like 30%, right? It wasn't a huge amount, but it was one where I was like, okay, I kind of saw, I was like, okay, I know that there's a groundhog or a badger or whatever the hell it is. So I knew that initially, and I'd see kind of bits and pieces of it. I didn't really see the climax or the beginning, so I kind of just saw the middle most of the time. So I guess So some of it was a mystery of how we got there, and then it was also a mystery on how it ended. So now I got to see both, and well. I guess we're going to sit here and mock a kid's film because, I mean, unless you thought differently, but it definitely left me wanting more out of, I know, a kid's film, but,
it sounds like you took it a bit too seriously, Lee.
Which, I mean, it is what it is, but I think it's important, right? Like, when we talk about kids' films, right? Kids' films can be good, right? Like, I think about something like K-pop Demon Hunters, which, maybe is a little bit more of a mature audience compared to this one, but still is kind of like garnered or aimed at, a younger audience, and it can still have a very good storytelling, music, visuals, and everything can work for it.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say The Never-Ending Story. I didn't know you were gonna go there.
Oh my gosh, no! Like The Never-Ending Story, that one's dark as hell, right? So that one's to be very different. So. But like I said, it definitely was things that, to your point, right? Maybe I'm being a little too hard on it, but we're here to talk about the movie, and just because it's a kid film doesn't mean it gets an automatic pass. So, so the movie starts off, right? We get to meet Mabel, right? So Mabel is our main character. We see little, young version of Mabel, right? And clearly she has an affinity for animals, right? So we see her bring a bunch of, various classroom pets from, snakes to turtles to there's some birds there. Don't know how that will work. She shoves it in her book bag. I kind of like laughed at that sequence because I'm like, I hope she doesn't open that book bag because she's going to learn how nature works really quick, right?
It kind of reminds me of that scene from Borat where he's got the chicken in the little duffel bag, and he's so frustrated he like throws it to the ground. We hear the chicken squawk.
Yeah, right. It's just like clearly, right? And once again, right? I understand what they're going for, but it was just kind of funny because I'm like, she's going to open that bag, and there's going to be. Unfortunately, a lot of animals that are not going to still be okay. So, but in essence, right, she's trying to escape the school with these, little critters. And she gets found by the school staff, and she ends up biting one of them, right? So this gets her into trouble. And she gets brought to Grandma's house, right? And Grandma plays a very quick role, but a significant role in this, right? Because the grandmother, shows her to this glade, right? I don't know how far the glade is from the house because it definitely feels like I feel like the story kind of sets it up that the glade's like in the grandmother's backyard, but then I also feel like that's not possible because the glade is now having construction go through it. I don't really understand that, but it is what it is. But the grandma brings Mabel to this glade, right? And it's just there, and it helps bring her peace, right? And I think that's ultimately what the grandmother's trying to do. And we kind of just, see this, and then we get our transition to Mabel as a adult, right? So I think she's like 19 or something when we kind of get to the story, and we find out that the Mabel wants to protect the glade because now the mayor, right, of Beaverton is trying to build a highway through the glade, right? And we do find out that, while, somewhere between when Mabel was young and now as an adult, we find out that the grandmother passed away, right? And I guess the parents have moved somewhere. I guess in a very contrived way not to have the parents of the story. I guess kind of interesting to think that Mabel, I guess her parents just kind of left her with their sickly grandmother. And then when she passed on...
Well, to be fair, she chose to stay with her, right?
I mean, she did, right? But I mean, I just think it's so weird that you have like a 19-year-old that's just kind of living on her own. And I mean, a lot of cartoons do this, right? We see it all the time. But it just kind of funny to think about that they do have the parents in it, and they're just like, that's fine. You do you. You're 19. You live your life. So Mabel decides like, hey, this glade means a lot to me. I want to help protect it. So she, concocts this plan where she's gonna kind of refill the glade with animals, so this way they can't build over it. So this is our introduction to Mabel, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and say this: I found Mabel to be super obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like throughout the whole film, right, she's just focused on the glade, and whatever has to happen, she's gonna get her way. Now,
so she's a PETA activist, basically.
Yeah, yes, right. She absolutely is, right. And like I said, I can appreciate, right, that she has sentimental value for this because of the relationship she had with the grandmother, right? I get that, right? It makes sense to me. I get it. But at some stage, right, I hope the moral of the story was that the glade wasn't going to be important. It was the memories that she had with the grandmother, but it ends up not doing that, right? It ends up taking it in a very different direction. But I wanted to get I wanted to see what you thought about Mabel, right? Because I know, it's, a younger character. They're typically, can be a little hot-headed or stupid, but I just found her throughout. She was always just like pissed off at something, and it just became really hard for me to root for her. Like even towards the end, like they try to like kind of, I guess, rescue her, but I don't know. I just felt like I just watched her be too much of a grouch the whole time to really care.
I mean, she kind of reminds me of when Bender says "kill all humans." She's someone who will take one for a beaver, but when it comes to humans, oh well, fuck those guys. I don't want anything to do with them.
Well, she does at least not want to have the mayor die when we get there, right? So she at least
back on
it. But
well, it's a journey that she goes through, right?
Yes, correct.
Because she's very misanthropic at the very beginning, and then what we get, she's less misanthropic.
Yes, which is not saying a lot because it went from being at like 110% down to like 105. So still very crazy, but it is what it is, right? So Mabel decides, hey, I'm going to refill this glade with animals. And what's a really critical animal? It's a beaver, right?
They live in Beaverton, so.
Yes, right. And how hard is it to find a beaver, right? She even says it. So she wants to find a beaver. So she locates one, and the beaver kind of is acting a little bit weird. And you see the beaver kind of like move towards a van, and then it looks like the beaver gets kidnapped. Which I was like, okay, I kind of interested, like, what's going on with this now? These people just look like they kidnapped a beaver. But they, we watch these people bring this beaver back to a college, and we find out that it's her professor, right? That has created a device, right, that allows people to transfer their consciousness into, I mean, essentially robots, right? And in particular, they're building a lot of robots in the form of animals so they can kind of interact with the animals. So I was like, okay, that's kind of an interesting thing to play with, right? So, you know, you get your consciousness moved into a human or excuse me, into a robot, and the robot can kind of interact with everything. And luckily, they have the capability of just like, I guess they just, all animals, they know how to talk with each other. So that was convenient for the story. But Mabel wants to, you know, use this technology, right? Now that she finds it, to inhabit the body of a beaver to help save the glaive, right? So she decides, hey, I'm going to just, I guess, kind of just do my own thing, and I'm just going to not follow the directions of the scientists, and I'm just going to go ahead and go all into this, right? I have no idea about it. They even make a joke about Avatar, right? And at least in Avatar, right, they kind of show like you have to kind of build up into knowing your body. For this, you just kind of jump in and hey, all this shit happens, right? So Mabel is now a tiny little beaver. And I'm going to reference her as like Beaver Mabel probably a bunch, just so you know it's her in her beaver form and not in her normal form. Really weird, but it is what it is. So we got Beaver Mabel, right? So she is taken to the forest, right? She's able to communicate with the animals. She's trying to find, you know, a beaver to kind of take over. She ends up finding the king of all beavers, right? A beaver with a little crown, and his name is George, which I found very interesting that the beaver's name was George. I thought they might go with something else, but we got George the beaver. Now, George, right? So he is the king of the mammals, right? And for George, right, he's trying to create this like animal utopia where all the animals they live together, and they even, you know, want to kind of cohabitate with the humans, right? Obviously when Mabel hears that, you know, oh, you want to, you know, work with the humans, that turns her off immediately. But George has this like really upbeat and plucky demeanor, right? He feels like there's a good in everybody. So that's the way it kind of happens. So, you know, we got Mabel, who's kind of this grouchy character. Then you got George, who's the accepting of everyone type of character. So Mabel's like, you know, hey, George, you know, I want to help, you know, protect this glade. We need to move a whole bunch of animals over here. And we find out that the reason that the animals are not there is because of the noise that's happening. So when they go into investigate, they find out that, you know, humans have kind of, you know, set up these trees, and it's creating a noise that's driving away all the animals. That's why there's no animals at the glade anymore, which is why, you know, they're able to build there, right? So that's in essence what's happening. So Mabel destroys, right, the tree, right? And then the animals are able to retake back the glade. But that was a very short-lived experience, because within like 5 minutes in the next scene, the humans have now destroyed like the dam, and now they've taken back over the place, right? So whatever. So, but I wanted to talk about George, right? Because on one end of the spectrum, you have Mabel, who's this, you know, very, you know, kind of dour character, right? She has this one-track mind, and it's kind of like, you know, she wants things to go her way regardless of what it takes to get there. And then you have George, right, who's this, you know, very nice beaver, and he just wants to kind of create this like utopia for stuff. But it's like, does George not like, I guess, understand that his world obviously doesn't work, right? Because they reference these things called the pond rules, right? Which is, if you're, you know, an animal has to eat. So animals get killed all the time in this world, right? Which, I mean, makes sense. That's what happens in the real world. But it's just weird how, I guess, George kind of just perceives it as like, you know what? You know, just, you got to eat, so you're going to have to eat somebody. And I guess instead of solving for their food problem, you just like, people eat each other. And I'm like, you know, it's kind of weird for George to suggest that, because I guess if you're like a worm or something and you're constantly getting eaten, you probably not feel as lucky to be there. But for George, he's okay to be there. So what do you think about George the beaver? Luka, tell me more about this character.
You got to understand, like, animals obviously view things different from us humans.
That's true.
I mean, animals are a lot friendlier than people. I don't know if you realize that. So it perfectly tracks that George would have this mindset because, well, that's what animals are. They're trusting. They trust everybody, right? And unless you put them through, a series of abuse where you treat them bad, most of the time they're going to be very forgiving. So the fact that George time and time again is very patient, very forgiving, it works because that's how animals behave. That's how they think. I just think it's kind of bad that Mabel is trying to introduce like the cynicism, which to them is a foreign concept because they're not wired that way, right? It's just so, and I find it kind of sad that Mabel is trying to basically bring all of her baggage and kind of dumping it all on the animals. And unfortunately, as we'll find out later, one of the animals kind of takes that to heart, really.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, right? She does definitely introduce some terrible concepts, which makes sense, right? Because the scientist, right? She's like, no, we don't interact with the animals, right? Like we're very hands off. And I'm like, you know what? That's a good point, right? Because we start to introduce things that they're not used to, and well, things could get a little bit feisty, right? As we'll kind of see. So, so the humans, right? They came back, they've retaken over the glaive. So now it's like, hey, we need to do something else. So Mabel convinces George that they need to get some help to push back the humans. So they call upon the council, right? And the council is just pretty much a bunch of different like leaders from other animal species. So we see like a bird, there's a fish, there's a toad, there's a butterfly. So these are our other kings or queens, right, or leaders of the other animal populations. So they bring them all together for this meeting, right? And Mabel pretty much points out, like, hey, you know what? This guy, this mayor, right? His name is Jerry, right? He is infringing on our territory. And even though it's just happening to us mammals right now, how long will it take before Jerry is, going after the ocean and going after the skies and blah, 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 right? So she sells to the council that, hey, this guy's in danger. So the head of the council, right, this butterfly, right, decides, you know what? Mabel makes a lot of sense, right? We don't want to have this Jerry guy, coming after us. So they decide, well, I know how to deal with this. We're going to kill him. Right?
No. They're gonna squish him.
Squish him, right? Which is definitely different from killing, right? As we could see. Which, like I said, they're gonna squish him, right? That's the nice way of saying it, right? That's the PG version of getting around that, right? So they're gonna squish Jerry, which is gonna mean that Jerry's gonna be unalived, right? So now Mabel, right? She even finds this to be extreme, right? For a character that is willing to go to a lot of, willing to do a lot, right? She's not willing to have a character get squished. Thank you, Luka, for explaining that. Doesn't want the character to get squished for the sake of the glade, right? So, Mabel tries to change the minds of the council, and inadvertently ends up killing the butterfly, which kind of messed up because she's saying like, hey, we don't want to hurt humans, but then she hurts the king of the insects or the queen of the insects. A little bit misleading, but hey, whatever. That's your movie, right? So Mabel kills it, and this is pretty much turns all the animals onto them, right? Because now all the animals are pissed off that Mabel has killed the queen of the insects, right? So now we have Mabel and George getting chased, and they get saved by a bird, right? A bird, which is one of the other robots that they have. And I will admit that I did kind of find it funny, right? I liked when they're escaping, right? And the bird gets hit and it just crashes into the cliff and explodes like a plane. Even with the sound effects and everything, there was a few things that made me laugh. That was definitely one of them. So, but during this whole sequence, right, Mabel has pretty much turned George's world upside down, right? George, had kind of this peaceful utopia. Now Mabel's kind of like, force this, stuff on him where now he is, no longer, king. He's been kind of like excommunicated. There's all this stuff going on. And it just really bothers me how quickly the film just makes Mabel's actions okay. Right? There is no real payoff because, I mean, for George, like, George has really gone through the ringer for Mabel, right? He's supported her the whole time, right? He's been so nice and accepting of her, right? And Mabel continues to just want things to happen her way, and she doesn't think about the consequences. And I hate how the movie, right, at this stage, right, it does do it a little bit later, but at this stage, they don't hold her accountable for it, and it just bothered me, right? Like, what do you think it would take for George to get pissed off, Luka? Like, what is it that's going to take for him to go down the dark path? Because I feel like for the movie, right, they give Mabel way too many free passes for being as selfish as she is.
I mean, again, animals are pretty patient and very forgiving. I mean, even when he finds out that Beaver Mabel isn't actually Beaver.
Thank you for calling her Beaver Mabel, by the way.
I mean, he's still quick to forgive. So
yeah,
they're sticking true to that theme of animals are patient and humans aren't.
Yep. No, I mean, but what about all the animals that are attacking them, right? Like a bunch of animals that now are trying to attack them. Why are those animals not nice?
Because snakes are mean. I mean,
snakes are mean.
I mean, especially you live here in North Carolina right now. There's like huge sighting of copperhead snakes. So.
Oh yeah, no, definitely stay away from that. We were talking about some animals earlier that don't play nice. Those types of animals do not play nice.
But I mean, to like your point, I mean, Mabel, what she creates is a problem of her own making, right?
Yes.
I mean, sure. Is it sad that the glade is gone and that it's going to be turned into a beltway? Yeah, but I kind of get the feeling that Mabel kind of lives in this fantasy world where she's not really understanding like what it actually means to live in the real world, right? Which is why she's so quick to gravitate towards this Hoppers program, and yet, as Dr. Sam pointed out earlier, she is late to most of her classes, or she doesn't even bother showing up at all, right?
Yep.
So she spends most of her free time going around protesting and doing all these things because, well, that just suits what she wants to do, which is a childish way of living your life because children do whatever it is they want to do. There's no responsibility or accountability for what it is. And I mean, I'm going to sound like a parent for a second, but the whole point of being an adult is to do things that you don't want to do, even when you don't want to do it. Right.
Very true.
I mean,
Very true.
I mean, do you think anybody wants to get up early in the morning and go to work? No, like, ideally, Lee and I would like this to be our full-time gig, just watching movies and talking about it online. But unfortunately, at the moment, that's not something that we can really do. We don't have that luxury. We have to, get up and go to work for 8 hours of the day and kind of just kind of doing the best that we can. And I feel like that's a lesson that Mabel never really understands throughout this entire movie.
Yes.
Which is sad because Disney movies in the past have been able to tell compelling stories with characters who grow, right? They learn throughout the 90-something minutes to where they come out, a much different person. The only thing that's different about Mabel is that she was a beaver and then she's a person. But
very true.
Yeah, but really she's not. I mean, she's still the same. She's still the same. At the end of the movie, it's just now she's kind of less bitchy, if that's even possible.
Yes, a little bit less. And, now that you said this, Luka, you made me think of something. And I think the problem is that if Mabel was younger, I would be a lot more accepting of this. I think the fact that we know that she's in college is just kind of what bothers me. So I don't know. Maybe it's an age thing, but I think if she was younger, I could accept more of her antics and not her understanding. But it's just like, once you're in college, it's like, come on, like you have to kind of shed the idea that you're a kid at some point, right?
Well, here's another point I will bring up, right? It's that when all this happens, Mabel's grandmother's, gone off into the afterlife at this point.
Yes.
And my thing is like, if you really wanted to raise the stakes, maybe it could have been something where the grandmother was still alive. Like Happy Gilmore. Like, I will use Happy Gilmore as an example, right? Completely silly movie, but at least you can understand what what his motivation is for taking part in that golf tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the grandmother was still around and Jerry was doing everything to kind of like get on take the land to extend the beltway, and Mabel's doing all this, all these antics, it would be a bit more forgiving, because at least then, even though she's pretty stupid in her approach, you can understand where her heart's coming from, because she's trying to help her grandmother out, who's at this point old and can't really do much on her own, as opposed to what we have here, where it's like, oh, it's more out of sentimental value, right?
Yep.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times where the places that I've known as a kid are long gone. They've been torn down or redeveloped. That doesn't mean I'm going to go ape shit and start doing crazy things. Like, you just deal with it and get on, right?
Yeah.
So that's the issue that I have with this movie, is the fact that, one, you have an immature character who refuses to grow up and refuses to learn for the most part and change. And two, you really screwed the pooch on this one, because if you were going to give Mabel a good reason as to why she does what she does, at least have there be more at stake than just sentimentality.
Yes.
Sentimentality is a straw man argument, and anyone will tell you, from a little kid to a doctor of philosophy, they will tell you that's a straw man argument for doing anything, right? I mean, at least if you have the grandmother there still living in the house, and she is being threatened by Jerry and bullied into, I guess, selling the land or whatever it is that they did in Happy Gilmore, it would be a bit more plausible,
Yep. So Jerry's Shooter McGavin, right?
Pretty. I mean, he does have that look about him anyway. So
He does. Now, so now that we've kind of gone through this, right? So we got Mabel and George, along with some of the animals that still are behind them. They want to go save Jerry, right? In essence, right? We don't want to see Jerry get squished. So now the focus of the movie kind of shifts over to Jerry, right? And it's kind of interesting. I like how the movie really shows Jerry is just a really likable guy, right? Like, he's nice. Like, he cooked food for his mom. Like, staying with him. Like, his neighbor likes him. Like, it's just like, oh, cool. This is kind of refreshing, right? It's, the mayor's not just a bad guy, right? He's just kind of a guy that is doing something that's, a little bit underhanded, but, the people enjoy him. So I thought that was
he's not a cartoon villain, in other words.
Yes, exactly, right? Like, he's, for the most part, a well-liked guy. So we have, we have all these, crazy critters show up, and, they're sitting there confronting Jerry, who obviously kind of freaks out that a bunch of animals are in his vehicle, right? Because he's starting to drive to the rally or whatever he's be going to. It's just kind of, I did like the fact that they use like a phone to kind of communicate to him, because humans can't understand animals, so they kind of use the phone, which I thought was kind of a creative way to kind of get around that. So I was like, okay, cool. See, the beavers, Beaver Mabel is communicating via voice chat, in essence. And
have you by the way, have you noticed the way the animals look in this movie? Because when the animals are talking to each other, they're wide-eyed and everything.
Yes.
But when the humans look at them, they kind of look like they're stuffed animals.
Yes,
right?
yes. They definitely there definitely was this kind of an interesting, I guess, perception shift depending on who's viewing it, right? So, which, like I said, I actually kind of liked them when they were like, I guess, more of the normal critters as opposed to the more animated ones. But it is what it is. So, but yeah, so Jerry's like, hey, cool. I guess I'm gonna listen to the talking beaver, which, I mean, I guess you kind of have to, because it's a talking beaver. So he's trying to flee. We see a giant shark get brought out of the water by some birds to try to kill Jerry. Jerry obviously thinks that he's like in some type of dream world, which I don't really blame him. Obviously, that would probably be like, you know what, this is kind of sus to me too. But they're able to, kind of help protect Jerry. But you also have the scientists are still trying to get Mabel back into her body, right? So you kind of have these kind of multiple things going on in the same sequence where they're all having kind of a different mission going on. But eventually what ends up happening is, Jerry gets saved. The scientists, right, they capture Mabel to kind of get her back in her human body, which they do, right? So this is the first time since the very beginning of the film where now Mabel is now human Mabel, not Beaver Mabel, right? And this is actually the only time she changes, right? So she's now going to be human throughout, right? So we're going to have normal Mabel throughout the rest of this. But as Mabel gets, turned into a human or gets her consciousness transferred back to her human self, you kind of have this like really kind of like depressing scene. And it definitely made me feel something because like you see kind of like the stuffed body of the Mabel Beaver and you see George coming up and he's trying to rescue it. Obviously, George doesn't understand what's going on, and you kind of see it's like, oh, damn, I feel bad for George.
That was a really sad moment. I'm not going to lie.
Yes,
it
was. That was definitely something I was like, George is such a likable character. It's kind of unfortunate that he has to play off of Mabel, who like just kind of bothers me more than she probably should. But yeah, so you kind of see that, but so that's kind of what happens. Then, unfortunately, as this is all going on, the council and all their animals, they kind of overwhelm the group, right? So now we kind of get transported to the lab. So we find out that the council has now gotten to the Hopper lab. And now the new head of the council, right, that took the place of the dead butterfly, right, which was her son that was a caterpillar, right? So Titus, right, was the name of it, kind of a I like the name of Titus. So, but what they decide is that, well, they're going to use the Hopper technology a little bit different. So now the council, right, the new head, is going to have their consciousness put into a clone of Jerry. So kind of an interesting thing. So you have fake Jerry, is now kind of brought into this that's being controlled by the little butterfly. And fake Jerry, well, fake Jerry doesn't like humanity because humans are kind of assholes, as we've kind of seen. And, it kind of makes sense that he would feel that way, especially because Mabel is technically a human and killed his mom. But so his plan is he's going to, use the weird noise making trees and he's going to destroy the humans, right? Or squish the humans, right? I forget if we're still saying squish, but
we're still saying squish.
Yeah, okay, we're still saying squish. So he's gonna squish all the humans that are up there. Right. So now in order to save the day, right, what happens is that Mabel has to join up with Jerry in order to save everything, which I thought was really interesting. I hate how it took I hate how it only spends about 15 minutes on this, but I thought that this was going to be a really cool segment of the film where, Mabel and Jerry, who have been at odds for most of this, now have to work together. So I thought that was a really cool thing. And we see that Jerry hops into the body of a beaver, right? Wears a tie, and helps Mabel escape the chair that she's stuck in. And I thought this was interesting. And I was kind of curious, Luka, did you feel like this was a big opportunity to kind of have, I don't know, some cool moments? Because for me, we've seen these characters very much be at odds throughout the film. And now they have to work together. I thought that was a cool premise to include. I just wish they did it earlier.
Well, I kind of thought it was appropriate when they did it, just because Jerry is pretty much, well, oddly enough, Jerry, just like Mabel, is kind of like stuck in this one campaign, whereas Mabel's all about preservation, Jerry's about development.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting to see how these two come from completely opposite directions, and yet with the same level of conviction are forced to kind of cooperate. Although I will be honest with you, I was expecting Mabel to hop back into the beaver body, but
yeah,
but it was nice to see that that bit kind of got played out, and they're like, okay, you know what, we did our thing. Mabel had fun as a beaver. We're gonna let someone else have a go at it.
Yes.
I kind of wish Jerry kind of did more with the beaver body, but it's
Agreed.
neither here nor there.
There's a few things I'll talk about at the end because I definitely had some feelings about that. But yeah, so we have the real Mabel, right, is now confronting the fake Jerry. So I realize how this is kind of sounding at this stage. And she gives this speech where she's like, hey, I understand why you're mad, blah 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 blah. And I did find it kind of funny. His reaction to her speech was, "Your speech sucked." I actually laughed at that.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That was good. I was like, you know what? That's pretty funny because everyone always has a speech and it always changes people's minds. But for fake Jerry, right? His mind's not going to be turned, right? So he just kind of makes fun of her for that. But he's not interested. So
I mean, could you imagine? Could you imagine, like, in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? if Jimmy Stewart was giving that speech and someone just stood up and said, "Man, Mr. Smith, that speech sucked," the movie would go in a completely different direction.
Oh, absolutely. So I gave this props, right? There was a few moments where I definitely got a big chuckle out of it. That was definitely the other one for me that really stuck out in my brain. Was that moment. So the fake Jerry, right, is trying to squish all the humans. And unfortunately he inadvertently creates a fire that is destroying the forest, and it's spreading towards the city. So the animals, right, wanting to, protect the humans because, animals are boss like that. The animals kind of break the dam to their, little utopia that they've created. And it spills out all the water, and that extinguishes the flames. And this is where kind of our movie wraps up, because we see that Jerry, right, he has a change of heart at the end of this, right? So he, understood that the animals kind of, protected them, right, or helped them solve their situation. So he kind of has a change of heart, and now he's interested in repairing the glade and kind of bring it back to what it once was, which I thought was really nice, right? And you kind of had this, nice moment where, Jerry and Mabel are kind of working together. Great to still kind of bickering, but working together to help clean up the glade, right? And everything kind of finalizes with Mabel. She graduates college and she joins the little science group that she's been, kind of working with. And she gets to spend some time with George up at the glade, right? Even though they don't understand each other, I think they understand each other, so to say. And that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, and as I kind of watched it, I was like, you know what? It had some, good moments, but I don't know. There was just something that really bothered me throughout the film, right? And I think some of it was I just didn't really like the direction the story went throughout most of this, right? I thought it would have been cooler, right? And I kind of put in some notes, right, Luka? And I'm going to bounce off of you because you're a writer. You know this stuff better than I do. I wanted to see if maybe you had any suggestions on how you would change this film to make it better. If you feel
I already told you one part earlier.
Oh, yes, that's true, right? So this is what I was kind of thinking about, right? So I kind of thought the movie would be more interesting if more of the focus was more on Mabel and Jerry, right? Because to me, like, adding George is fine for it, but I also felt like maybe there was too many characters vying for screen time, right? I thought it'd be more interesting if, you have Mabel and Jerry, right? They're kind of at odds with each other. And then Jerry, he eventually finds out about the lab, right? So Jerry takes control of an animal, and he ends up sabotaging the animal colony to try to get away with it. But in doing so, the animals either like protect him or save him, or they do something that's very selfless, even though they're at risk, and that changes Jerry's perception on what needs to happen. Thus, he has kind of this change of mindset at the end, right? So I was just thinking, what does that seem okay to you? Did you think that sounds better, or did you have anything that you might change in this film to maybe spruce it up a little bit? Because I think that there's opportunity here.
I mean, I kind of wish we got equal time between Mabel and Jerry, just because, at least for the first half of the film, it just seemed Mabel heavy.
Yes. Which is weird because Jerry gets so much screen time at the end of it, right? Like literally the half an hour. It's a lot of Jerry, so I feel like there's a lot there. So I guess I'll kind of have my final thoughts about this, right? And yes, I realize I'm probably being a little bit too critical of the kids film, but there's great kids films out there that have great stories, and there's at least for me, I don't think there's a reason that this one should not be able to do that. And I think my issues with everything just kind of start off with Mabel, right? Because I feel like if you had a more likable main character, I think this would have gone a lot smoother, right? I'm not unsympathetic that she's going through a lot, right? Like, I don't want to be lost upon that, right? I understand, she lost her grandmother, right? A really hard loss to have. So I could kind of understand some of her mindset, but it just feels like she just lives in a reality that's different from our own, right? So, she's upset about the Glade, right? She kind of feels powerless to do something for it, which I totally get, right? That's a frustrating thing to feel. But then it's like she just tramples over everything and anything to get her way, right? We even see the scientist, right? Like, this scientist has been working on this for decades, right? This is her life's work. And Mabel pretty much ruins her funding because, the dean thinks it's too dangerous, right? So she just trampled over this poor lady's whole life's work, right? And I know she tries to play it off like, oh, I'm going to make a talking dog collar like an Up. But really, I mean, she just threw away everything because she wanted to save this Glade, which is just nothing but memories about her grandmother, right? I felt like having her match up with George would kind of lead to a little bit more, but I never really felt like she had enough character development to really justify it because I mean, she just always was out doing something. And even by the end, all of her actions, everything that she did, she still got her way, right? She ultimately got the Glade protected. And I would argue Jerry went through infinitely more character development in the half an hour we saw him than Mabel did the whole film, right? And I just feel like the focus of it was kind of poor with what they wanted to do. And it really kind of caused everything else to suffer, right? And the other thing is, right, so, I look back to, the caterpillar, right, Titus, right, who becomes it. I mean, Titus was just an animal that was willing to kill everything, right? I mean, squish everything, excuse me. Titus was willing to squish, anything, people, creatures. And it's like, okay, well, if Titus is able to do that, does that not make George see, like, you know what? Maybe not all animals are good. Maybe we could accept the fact that we could look for the good in people, but we could also accept the reality that not everyone's good, right? Just like Mabel could accept the fact that, hey, I might not like my situation, but I could do what I can, but it doesn't mean I'm always gonna get the result I want. I just wish that there was a little bit more give and take on their ideals because it just felt like they were just one extreme or the other. And in the end, I would have liked to see them maybe come up with a little bit more of a concession that, hey, maybe not all animals are good, but I can still look at the good in things. That doesn't mean that you just have to accept blindly that everything is out there that's good. So
basically, you want the movie to teach kids that compromise is okay.
Yes, I want kids to get a little bit of a hard lesson, right? Like, you can sit there and live in your fantasy world, that's fine, right? It doesn't bother me, but like, it would have been nice if there was a little bit more of a concession that, hey, we can accept the good in people, but let's not just overlook the fact that, there's going to be some assholes out here. So, but if I have to give it a grade, like, I guess I give it like a 2.5 out of 5. Like, it's got some nice moments. There was a few scenes that make me chuckle. The fact that the little animatronic animals keep like blowing up in big explosions was kind of a running gag throughout. There were some humorous scenes, but it just felt like it just didn't have a strong message. And, I feel like we have seen better movies that are generated for the same audience that have had better results. So 2.5 out of me, 2.5, excuse me, out of 5 for me. Luka, take us away. What'd you think about Hoppers?
I'm gonna give it a 3.8 out of 5. I enjoyed it. I thought it was
wow. Wait, he's 3.8.
Yeah, 3.8 out of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I for what it is, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's not. It's one of those movies where sometimes you just shouldn't take it too seriously. You should just sit back and just watch and relax. Is Mabel a flawed person? Yeah. I mean, I think that think they could have done more to kind of make her more of a three-dimensional character than a two-dimensional character. As I said before, I think maybe they could have like steel manned some of her positions rather than just base everything on sentimentality, which is the way that a kid would view the world and not an adult. And I kind of feel like they missed the mark because, like I said, Disney movies, at least back in the day, did a pretty great job in teaching kids the importance of, the importance, life lessons that you would need, later on, such as, being loyal, being reliable, learning how to stand up for yourself, right? And I think to your point, the movie could have focused more on the power of compromise. They kind of just go from one extreme to the other. It's like it's either this or that. They don't really operate in a gray area. I'll tell you this too. So, Lee, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I remember watching Star Trek Enterprise season 3. And funny enough, there was a council of aliens composed of, alien species that were insectoid, mammalian, aquatic, humanoid, ape-like. And what's funny is that, in that council, because this was a council that was deciding on whether or not they wanted to destroy Earth and wipe out humanity, all the other animals were a bit hesitant, except for the insects and the reptiles, who were like, "Yeah, we're just going to kill all humans because they're going to kill us. We might as well get rid of them first." So I thought it was a little bit funny that that they were going with the same premise that that they saw in Star Trek like 23 years ago, which is pretty weird. But
it was the insect one that had the most crazy wants to kill all humans thing too. So also
and the reptilians were kind of going along with it as well, which is pretty weird. But overall, it didn't take away from the fact that I thought it was a genuinely funny and heartwarming movie. And in a weird way, I could sort of understand where Mabel is coming from, because we're talking about someone who is misunderstood, probably didn't have a lot of friends growing up, was a bit of a loner. They kind of, when you've been in that situation for, ever since you were a kid, understandably, you are going to develop this sort of misanthropic mistrust in other people, right? Obviously, you can trust animals, but you can't trust people, which is a very sad thing. And I think, and at least I think in this case, Mabel, is beginning to see that maybe I should give people a second chance.
Yeah,
and we kind of see that here. Now, obviously, she's 19 years old, and if you know the science, your brain doesn't stop developing until you're 25. So she's got another 6 years to go. So hopefully by that point, she'll a bit more mature to where she can discern for herself. Maybe this is the most appropriate path to go down. Maybe this is not the most appropriate path to go down. I would say I hope they don't do another sequel, but they pretty much have said it, in certain terms. So we are going to see something similar. My question is, are we going to see Mabel come back, or are we going to have a different cast?
She's got to come back, right? If you're going to make a sequel, you have to bring back Mabel, and she's going to have to become a beaver again at some stage. So they'll figure it out. So. But yeah, thank you for everyone that listened to this. Like I said, I know that it's hard being an asshole on the internet when it comes to talking about kids films. So, but very interested to see how do people like it? Do you feel like this had a stronger opportunity to do a little bit more, or did you feel like it landed exactly where it needed to land and you enjoyed it no matter what? So, I'm very curious to see what everyone thinks, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll check you on the next review.